Then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. Now the Herodians apparently are a political party aligned with Herod, and their angle is to make peace with Rome by adopting the customs of Rome. This is entirely opposite what the Pharisees want. The Pharisees want to be separated and maintain a pure Jewish tradition-based life, so they could not possibly be more opposite, and these two parties, the Pharisees and the Herodians, could not possibly be more opposite in their goals and agendas, except for the fact that they both hate Jesus. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. Teacher, they said, we know you are a man of integrity. By the way, this is all happening on Tuesday. Monday was the day he went into the temple. He cursed the fig tree on the way, went into the temple, overturned the tables, and he taught the people. Tuesday, they're on the way to the city again. They see the fig tree withered. We read about that in Mark. Matthew doesn't give the time frame there. And then they go back to the city, and this time the Pharisees, apparently having regrouped from being caught off guard the day before, come to challenge him. So this is all happening on Tuesday. This would have started when he enters the temple courts and starts teaching, and then the chief priests and elders of evil come to question him. That's in the middle of chapter 21. So this is all happening on that Tuesday. So, teacher, they said, we know you are a man of integrity, and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by men because you pay no attention to who they are. They're softening him up. They're trying to butter him up. Tell us then, and what is your opinion? Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? They're trying to get him in trouble. They're trying to get him in trouble either with Caesar or with the people. The people will want to hear him say, you don't have to pay taxes to Caesar. That will get him in trouble with Caesar. If he says, you should pay your taxes to Caesar, that'll get him in trouble with the people because they don't want to. But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, you hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax. They brought him a denarius, and he asked them, whose portrait is this, and whose inscription? There are still some of these coins left out there today. You can look an image of them up on Google pretty easily, and you'll see the face of Tiberius Caesar and his inscription on them. They all did that. Caesar's, they replied. Then he said to them, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. When they heard this, they were amazed. So they left him and went away. That's Caesar's coin. It has his face on it. It has his inscription on it. It has his name written on it. If he wants it back, give it to him. But give it to God what's God's. If you can't tell the difference, well, then maybe you need more teaching. Maybe you need more maturity. Maybe you need to pray for more wisdom and insight. That same day, the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him with a question. Teacher, they may have a couple of different motivations here. To some degree, they're trying to trap Jesus. They're trying to get him to admit the logical fallacy that they see in the doctrine of the resurrection. They don't believe in the resurrection. Jesus clearly does, because he's been teaching about it. In fact, he's raised people from the dead, so clearly he does. And so they are trying to get him into a logic problem that clearly they have spent time thinking about. Like someone somewhere in the past would have sat around thinking about this sort of thing until they came to this logical puzzle that they can't see a solution to. And so they don't think Jesus has one either. So they want to get him to deny the concept of a resurrection. They want to show him what they believe is the fallacy of his belief in a resurrection by coming up with a scenario that highlights how illogical it is when you take it to its natural endpoint, at least as they see it. Like you can do that. That's a fair way of pointing out someone's inherent logical problems. Is okay if you take your belief, your principle, your argument to its logical end, does it still make sense? And if it doesn't, then your argument itself may have shortcomings. So they think Jesus' teaching about the resurrection has shortcomings. They think they can prove it by posing this logic problem to him, and he won't be able to. They clearly don't have an answer for it, and they don't think anyone does. They don't think Jesus does. Now remember, the Pharisees did believe in a resurrection. So this is an area where the Sadducees and the Pharisees are not aligned with each other. So Jesus is, and we'll read it, and Paul will use this to his advantage too when he's dealing with these people. He'll use this doctrine of resurrection to pit these two groups against each other, because the Sadducees don't believe in it, and the Pharisees do. So there's a lot going on here in this question. That same day, the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him with a question. Teacher, they said, Moses told us that if a man dies without having children, his brother must marry the widow and have children for him. That's the concept of levirate marriage. But what that basically means is that you have to remember that in their day, in the Old Testament, at the time that they wrote that, they didn't necessarily know that there was going to be a resurrection, because Moses doesn't say anything about a resurrection. The Sadducees don't believe in a resurrection, partially because Moses himself doesn't say anything about a resurrection, at least as far as they could see in Moses' writings. And they only accepted Moses' writings as authoritative from God. Now, later books in the Old Testament do start mentioning a resurrection, but the Sadducees didn't accept those books as being authoritative. They only accepted Moses' books. And Moses doesn't. So in Moses' day, and in the days before Moses, in the ancient days when the book of Moses were written in beforehand, the way you lived forever in those people's minds at the time was to have sons who carried on your name, and your name lived forever. You could not live forever. And they did not know about a future resurrection someday. So Moses didn't think that. Abraham didn't think that. You go back to Moses' books and all the time before that, the people of that day weren't thinking about a resurrection. So to them, the idea of living forever is that you have sons who carry on your name, and your name lives forever. So if you die without sons, then your brother is supposed to marry your widow and have a son by her in your name. And then the next son he gets after that can be his own. We read about that a lot in the Old Testament. That was a very big deal to them back in that day. Well, the Sadducees are going to take that and say and pose a logic problem. They're going to take this idea of levirate marriage and try to use it to disprove the concept of a resurrection. So there were 7 brothers among us. The first one married and died, and since he had no children, he left his wife to his brother. The same thing happened to the second brother and the third brother, right on down to the 7th. Finally, the woman died. Now, then, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be of the 7, since all of them are married to her? Now, they of course can't comprehend the idea that they can all be married to one woman. Now, they wouldn't have a problem with 7 women being married to one man, but the idea of one woman having 7 husbands would have just made their brains explode, so they can't even countenance that. They can't even consider that as a possibility. But they see it as, what are you going to do now? How can you have this woman married to 7 men? You can't have that. Jesus replied, you are in error, because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God. If someone is wrong, it's okay to just tell them you're wrong. You are in error. You do not know what you are talking about. You are lacking vital information that lack of information puts you in error. At the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven. So what he's saying here is that the life to come, the life of the age to come after the resurrection is not going to be the same as this life. They're thinking about it in terms of everything being the same as it is now. you're just going to get resurrected into the same body you had when you died. Maybe improved. I'm sure they probably say it would be improved. But it's not going to be like any difference. It's going to be the same customs, the same traditions, the same laws, the same ways of doing things. Like there's not going to be a difference between the age to come and the age now. And that's just fundamentally wrong. Okay? They were not they were thinking totally in terms of just the situation as it is, continuing on forever. And that is not going to be what happens. The life in the age to come, the life after the resurrection, is not going to be the same as this life now. In particular, there will be no need for posterity to carry on your name to live forever, because you yourself will be living forever. Remember that whole custom of marrying your brother's widow and having a son in his name is designed to keep that name going, because in their minds, in their culture at that time, that's how they lived forever. Because in Moses' day and in the era before that, they didn't know about a resurrection. And the proof text that Jesus will give here does not actually say anything explicit about a resurrection. So the people of Moses' day and beforehand did not know about that, so they didn't know they were going to live forever after they died. So their way of living forever was to have a lot of sons to carry on your name and live forever. Well, that will not be necessary in the resurrection. You'll be living forever in the resurrection, and you won't need to have sons to carry on your name to live forever, because you yourself will be alive forever. So that whole idea of marrying, because so the marriage concept as they're talking about it here is the concept of marrying your brother's widow to raise sons for him after his death. And that's not going to happen anymore. So at the resurrection, people will either marry or be given in marriage. They'll be like the angels in heaven. Now, whether or not this means there will be no sex in heaven, I'm not willing to go that far. Because when you do that, you start creeping into that territory, that mindset where you think that everything physical and pleasing to the senses is sinful. And that's a very easy trap to fall into, that human beings have fallen into many times over the centuries. You know, there's not going to be sex in heaven because sex is sinful. You know, we don't really want sex in heaven. We're not going to be eating in heaven because we're not going to have these carnal, fleshy desires. I'm not going to go that far with it, because I think that we're starting to creep into that territory where we just kind of automatically assume that physical matter itself is evil, and that is a form of Gnosticism that teaches that the matter of the universe is inherently evil and will have to be destroyed someday. And I don't think that's accurate. So I'm not quite willing to go that far, but I am. Clearly, we're not going to be mating to procreate. But about the resurrection of the dead, have you not read, which of course they have read, because again, these people would have memorized the scriptures, every word in them. Have you not read what God said to you? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. He wasn't. He didn't say, I was the God of Abraham. When he came to Moses, that goes back to his encounter with Moses at the beginning of Exodus. Exodus 3, he calls out to Moses in the burning bush. Moses says, here I am. Do not come any closer. Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place you're standing is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now, all three of these men had been dead for hundreds of years by the time Moses comes along. The book of Genesis ends with Jacob dying in Genesis 49. And Exodus begins a couple hundred years later with Moses being born. And of course, Isaac died before Jacob, and Abraham died before Isaac. So by the time Moses comes along, and he's already 80 by that point, Jacob and Isaac and Abraham had been physically dead for a couple of hundred years at least. But God still refers to them in the present tense. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Luke will say, because to God all are alive. Their bodies may be rotting in the grave somewhere. Well, they're in a cave. Literally, all three of those men and their wives are in a cave somewhere. Their bodies are. But somehow or another, in some way, from God's point of view, those people are alive. And he's speaking about them as if they are alive. When the crowds heard this, they were astonished at his teaching, because nobody had ever noticed that before. Nobody had ever suggested before that God's use of the present tense verbs when talking about the previous generations means that those generations, to God, are still alive. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment of the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. That's from the prayer in Deuteronomy 6. Deuteronomy 6, verse 4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord with your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And that is number one on the list of commandments. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. He didn't even ask for the second, but Jesus is going to provide it anyway. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So those are at the top. Everything else hangs on top. Back then they didn't really have shelves like we do, but they had pegs they hung things on. So they have a peg in the wall, two pegs in the wall that are these two commandments, and everything else hangs on those pegs. There's more to that particular exchange. We read about that in Mark. Mark gives more detail about that conversation. So they've all had their shot at Jesus. They've all tried to trip him up, make him say something that would get the people mad at him, provide a logic problem he couldn't solve, work him into a corner he couldn't get out of, and none of them have been able to do it. So now Jesus is going to ask them a question. While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them, what do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he? The son of David. Now, Jesus actually asked his disciples a very similar question a few chapters ago. Who do people say the Son of Man is? And then he said, what about you? Who do you say that I am? And Peter answered, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he's asking the Pharisees now, what do you think about the Christ? And of course he's referring to himself, obviously. Whose son is he? The son of David, they replied. He said to them, he's got him now. He's got him now. How is it then that David, speaking by the Spirit, calls him Lord? For he says, the Lord, the Master, said to my Lord, sit in my... What are you doing, Cat? Like, why do you have to do this? Just why? Why do you have to do this? Just go sit somewhere else. That's so annoying. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. Why did you have to do that? Like, just why? Just what drove you to need to do that? If then David calls him Lord, how can he be his son? If he's David's son and comes after David, how can he also be David's Lord and come before David? That's basically what John the Baptist will say in the book of John when he introduces himself, well, not introduces himself, but declares himself not to be the one they're looking for and only his messenger. He says, this was he of whom John chapter 1, verse 15, John the Baptist says, that he who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me. Well, what sense does that make? How can he be David's son and come after David and be David's Lord and come before David at the same time? The only way he could do that is if he's the Son of God. No one could say, but they don't want to say that, because then they'd be saying that he's the Son of God. This guy they're talking to right now is the Son of God. So they don't say anything. No one could say a word to him in reply. And from that day on, no one dared to ask him any more questions.